Hey guys, welcome back to the Burp Suite Certified Practitioner exam preparation. And in this lecture, we are going to look at how to find vulnerabilities. Not necessarily how to exploit them, but more like how to find them, what to look for. And the exploitation process is a subsequent step, right? And the exploitation process is really defined well in the Portswigger labs, like how you actually exploit certain vulnerabilities versus my aim here is like a little bit of a cheat sheet for all these major classes of vulnerabilities on what to look out for, basically. So let's dive right in. Number one, SQL injection. So this is my personal cheat sheet, right? Like, for example, when you hunt for SQL injection, always use the tick and look for 500 errors to start with. It's the same places like in cross-site scripting. Try it on all different methods available, right? Like not just on a get or on a post method, but also try the other CRUD methods, for example. Use sleep to verify. Right, like so this is especially important when it comes to bug bounty. When it comes to the exam, you actually need to exploit it, right? So this is important. The Burp exam expects you to exploit a SQL injection if you find one, right? It's not enough to just put a sleep command in and wait for 5 seconds or stuff like that. And that's very important. So I put a couple of links in there. So first of all, where to look for everywhere, basically everywhere where you can control input. Also, you know, most of the today's SQL injections are blind. So you want to work like, for example, with errors and time delays and stuff like that. I use heavily SQL map for this because first of all, from a time perspective and also from a test usability perspective. Keep in mind that they can be, for example, in cookies, and very often SQL injections happen in cookie values and stuff like that. And sometimes you need to use special encoding like XML encoding, HTML encoding, URL encoding, you know, so always be aware of that, that even if the payload doesn't fire, it doesn't mean it's not vulnerable. GraphQL is huge for SQL injections these days as well. And so the 3 links here is on the book.hacktricks, obviously, so which is a very, very good repository. Also from Payload All the Things, typical SQL injection payloads, as well as the cheat sheet from Portswigger. And for the exam, bookmark that and have that open for the exam, right? Because this is, you might need that. Now, cross-site scripting, stored, reflected, DOM, right? In the real world, you would use like blind BXSS hunter or something like this, not for the exam, obviously. Then always think of context, right? Where it's reflected. It's like, is it reflected in HTML? Is there a DOM source sync? Is it reflected in an attribute, in a JavaScript script string, in a template literal? Is there Angular JS in place? Is it reflected in a link tag, in an event, like think event handlers and stuff? And then what you can do with it, right? Like, for example, stealing cookies is still there, even though it's less than it used to be, because a lot of the cookies these days have HTTP only. So they cannot be read by JavaScript, but it still happens. Also like fake login pages and stuff like that, that you can steal login credentials. What's very common is using XSS to perform CSRF, right? Like, for example, to exploit an XSS vulnerability and then to insert a script, which basically then does an email change via CSRF, right? That's very common. I also see it often in file uploads, right? Like HTML, SVG, polyglots, things like that in document uploads. Web cache poisoning in order to deliver a poison cache, an XSS payload to the user. HTTP request smuggling also to inflict cross-site scripting for other users. Click checking in order to get DOM XSS, for example. Post messages, right? Like DOM post messages in order to exploit a DOM XSS. In the return URLs, right? Like wherever you have like an open redirect, try to insert like a JavaScript alert 0 or something like this. And you can use a reflection scan in Burp with the scan profile. and stuff. But for the lab, you don't need that. For the lab, you basically will look for stuff manually. And once again, have the Portswigger cross-site scripting cheat sheet, have that open, have that ready for your exam, right? This is super, super important. I can only stress that because you might need this. And the other ones are good repositories as well. The last one you see in there is like a classic payload I use, which I, instead of Martin, what I do in my labs usually, I normally in engagements, I put that in because I instantly see what's happening to my input. Is this being filtered out? Is this being encoded and stuff like that? So this is a very nice payload you can use. CSRF, right? Cross-site request forgery. So look at impact functions. So there's no point doing a CSRF attack on a login form which is unauthenticated, right? So this is more interesting when you are authenticated already, right? And then within that function, like do a password change or something like this, update an account, then it's really, really important. The tests to do is like, is there a CSRF token, send a blank token, delete the token parameters, change the request method, those kind of things, right? Is the token shared with accounts? So can I use CSRF token A on account B and vice versa? What happens if I just change a single character but leave the length there in place? Is there the referrer header being used or something like this, right? As CSRF protection. What if I send a blank referrer header, for example? What if I send a blank origin? Those are all from the Portswigger labs, right? CSRF is also applicable to JSON. That's not really relevant for the exam, but you would need to smuggle the equal sign. So this is a whole nother topic around this. It's also possible in XML. Check all the methods, right? And sometimes CSRF means that the changes are reflected, but then they are not submitted. So you can combine this with click checking. So with one attack, you pre-populate the fields, and with the second one, with the click checking attack, you make the victim actually submit it, right? Login, log out, CSRF with cross-site scripting in combination. You find it on GraphQL endpoints. You have a lot of bypasses for the same site attribute, basically, and Portswigger has a lot of labs around that as well. So this is a vulnerability class which may pop up in the exam. Click checking. So how to identify it, look for missing X frame options header, right? If this is not present, then click checking is game on and stuff. And then again, try to chain it with CSRF so you can create impact. So as I just mentioned, like the input is reflected but not sent, and then use click checking to basically send it. So you can inflict DOM XSS, for example, via click checking, right? Click Bandit is an inbuilt Burp tool which allows you to create the skeletons much, much easier than if you do this in a text editor or something. So use Click Bandit. DOM-based vulnerabilities. So how to find them? Well, easiest option is using DOM Invader, right, which is part of the inbuilt Burp browser, which is the Chromium browser. So this has DOM Invader embedded. But also if you look through the source code, through JavaScript and stuff, like look for add event listeners, index of, location href, like all these things which I mentioned here. This doesn't necessarily mean that you have a DOM or a DOM-based vulnerability, but chances are there is one, especially when this is in the exam. The code is there for a reason, right? Course, right? So cross-origin resource sharing, basically look what's reflected, like access control allow origin, access control allow credentials, and then you play with the origin. Like, for example, does it take any origin, or does it have to be the specific domain of that application, like a subdomain, like example.com.attacker.com or something like this? So does the filter just check that example.com is in there, or does it actually do an exact match, right? Like, this is important. Try the null origin as well. Try to take a look at the payloads, which are mentioned here in those two repos. XXE, basically XXE happens or can happen wherever you have like XML uploads, where you upload XML and stuff like that. Not only that, it also happens where you have Markdown, for example, right? And PDF uploads are, for example, a common candidate for XXE as well. And so as per the exam or as per Portswigger, you look for XML input basically. And then from there, you will follow the methodologies from the labs on testing the different vulnerability types for XXE. SSRF, once again, huge vulnerability. So look for URL inputs, webhooks, API consoles, wherever you can supply a URL or something, right? And then obviously you need to find bypasses in most cases for that. So classic URLs are like URL equals target URL, request URL, path, those kind of things. And then try to get to an AWS metadata instance like shown there. SSRF also exists in headers sometimes or in the referrer, so also make sure that you include a payload there, like the Burp collaborator payload. SSRF is also possible via XXE in combination, right? And path traversal may be an option and things like that. So be on the lookout for that. But in a nutshell, SSRF, wherever you have an URL to be inputted. HTTP request smuggling. So for Burp, for the manual operation, there is 2 extensions you want to use to speed up things significantly. It's the HTTP request smuggler and the flow extension. Also for the lab, by the way, for the exam. You also have 2 really, really cool scripts. One is the smuggler.py. This is for HTTP 1.1 and the other one is for HTTP 2. And they can automate your request smuggling to a large extent, right? Like, so you have seen this maybe in my other courses that it's quite tedious to do HTTP request smuggling manually. And especially when you're in an engagement or exam or something, I would use those scripts. OS command injections, basically, a lot of these OS command injections these days are also not standard, but are blind. So basically that you don't see the output or you don't get the output reflected directly, but there is ways and means around it, like with Burp Collaborator, for example, to exfiltrate information from a cat command or from an ls command and things like that. So keep that particularly in mind for the exam, that these vulnerabilities which you encounter in the exam, the chances are that they are blind, right? And whether that's SQL blind or cross-site scripting may be blind, command injection may be blind, like all these kind of things. So keep this in mind, very important topic as well. SSTI, server-side template injection. So again, very good write-ups and very good samples on book.hacktricks, right? And also in the payload all the things repo. You can use a tool called TPL map, which you can download from GitHub, which can automate this as well. Like it's a scanner and exploitation framework. And then my favorite command to put in, if I suspect server-side template injection, is that one, right? Because it immediately tells me what's actually happening, what's filtered, and it's more to trigger error messages, right? Like to see, hey, what framework is it? Is it Django or whatever? Path traversal, right? So also very important. So whenever you see something like this, like where there is an image loaded with a file parameter, there might be a chance that there is some path traversal going on, right? Like those 2 examples are classic examples. And you can find like bypasses and actual exploitations in these 2 links as well. Access control vulnerabilities, okay, they are common everywhere. So test the different roles against each other, right? Like unauthenticated user, auth 1 versus auth 2, auth admin, unauth admin, cross-tenant, if there's multi-tenancy and things like that. So this is the whole access control section. just look wherever you have some sort of parameters or some sort of IDs being passed, right? Like whether that's emails, numbers, phone numbers, GUIDs, and things like that. And once again, test on all CRUD methods, right? Like, so it's not just on a get, but what does it do when there's a delete, when there's a post, when there is a patch, a put, and so on. Authentication. So check for multi-factor authentication flaws. Whenever you have 2FA or something, there might be a vulnerability somewhere. Check for enumeration vulnerabilities. Can you enumerate? Is there brute forcing protection, rate limiting, stuff like that? What about weak passwords, default logins, weak logins? And when it comes to Portswigger Labs, you don't need large lists. Those 2 lists are also relevant for the exam. So if you need to brute force something, you only have 100 usernames and 100 passwords. WebSockets, basically, look in the proxy WebSocket history. If that's empty, there's no WebSockets which you're using, right? And but if you see interaction in there, verify what functionality that is. From the labs, you probably have seen it in the Practitioner lab that it's mainly like chat functionality, real-time functionality, where WebSockets are heavily used. And attempt cross-hijacking attacks, right? So have the payload ready for that as well, and then you can modify it to your needs effectively, right? Web cache poisoning, very relevant also for the exam. So look for the cache headers received by the server. So this is like, especially when it comes to exam, right? Like, so, and I'm not giving away secrets or stuff, but what I've found in the exam is when there is a functionality, there's usually a bug associated with that functionality. And if there is cache headers being received by the server, there might be a vulnerability. It's not for granted, same like in the real world, right? But chances are that there is a vulnerability if there is caching being used. And then think of impact once again. So web cache poisoning to perform cross-site scripting and steal other people's cookies, right? Use like headers, like the X forwarded 4 or whatever it is. Use the paraminer Burp extension to brute force those headers, to find maybe headers which are not used by default, but they can be used, and then they can inflict web cache poisoning on the back of it. Insecure deserialization. So typically you see this in cookies or mainly in cookies. And then whenever this looks like a serialized object, head over to CyberChef, put it in there, and then decode it, and then see what kind of serialization is taking place. Is this like PHP based? Is it Java based, and so forth, right? These 2 repos are extremely valuable when it comes to deserialization. Information disclosure. So can I inflict any error messages by supplying malicious input, like malicious JSON, changing out a number versus an alphanumeric character, stuff like that? Like, always do what the application is not expecting. That's the way usually to find error messages and get information disclosure that way, right? And also, look through the Burp tree on the left-hand side. Is there any files? Are there any files? Are there any backup files? Are there any PHP files which reveal too much information, right? You can also use, for example, the Burp search feature and then grab for information like API, for example, or keywords like secret or password or those kind of things, right? And this is information disclosure. Application business logic. This is pretty much impossible to put on one single slide because that can be anything, right? Like those are logical flaws in the business process. Like, just a couple of examples is like, user can control the prices of a shopping cart. User can put in negative values and prices. You can change your email once you're an authenticated regular user to someone else's email without verification, and then you may get extra rights, stuff like that. Voucher issues, that you may be able to reapply a voucher once and then if someone else, or if you put another voucher in and then you use the original voucher again, it works, and those kind of things, right? Introducing extremely high quantities in shopping carts, or signing up with extremely long usernames, passwords, extremely long email addresses, and see how the application reacts, basically, right? That the old password is not checked when it's not supplied, or when the parameter is removed, those kind of things. When you send requests out of sequence, when you buy something, and the last one is like a confirmation. What happens if I put something in a shopping cart and then I send the confirmation, which should only happen as the very last step, like those kind of things. And skip stuff, just do everything else, do anything which you would normally not do as a regular user. That's really business logic, right? HTTP host header attacks, right? Like, can be used for multitude of things, like password reset, like trying to steal a password reset token, for authentication bypass, in combination with web cache poisoning, for routing-based SSRF, for example. Loads of different options you can try. Like, you can set the header to an attack server, see what it does, or you can set the header to localhost, or you can add a second header to an attack server and leave the first header to the regular machine. Those kind of things, right? Like, change the host header to the collaboration server, see if you get a ping back, and all kinds of things. But host header are quite can be quite risky, or can introduce vulnerabilities. OAuth, for example, well, OAuth flows very prevalent, very heavily used everywhere in the industry these days, right? And attacker's goal is like stealing an OAuth token via an open redirect, for example. Or if the state parameter is not checked or not even present, you may have the possibility that the victim, you can have the victim complete the authentication flow, the OAuth flow, which you initiated, which can lead to account takeover, for example. Sometimes it's so basic that it's making verifications only on an email address. So if you just change the email address in the request, you might be able to take over that account. The token vulnerabilities in general. So this is leading into session management, that you can reuse the OAuth token, for example. And if the OAuth token is not passed securely, like in post requests, it's visible in proxy history, browser history, in the log files of the web application, and all kinds of stuff. That the scopes are mismatched, or the scopes are changeable, that you can do some scope creeping, what you actually should get authorized to do. The code might be valid on other apps as well, like if it's multi-tenant and things like that. So also very important topic. File uploads. So whenever you see file upload functionality, test. You never leave it untouched, right? Whenever there's file upload, you check for, first of all, like, there's only client-side validation in place, that, like, it's restricting certain things in the GUI, but in Burp you can actually change it and stuff like that. So to bypass client-side validation, content type validation, right? Like, is it actually verifying the content type? Is it verifying the file extensions? Is only the image header checked, like the magic byte, right? Is the file name validated, or can I put like a cross-site scripting payload as the name, as the actual file name? Can I override other people's file names and things like that? Or does it truly have a unique file name for every single upload and stuff? Is the htaccess file writable, which should not be? In one of the Burp labs it is, and then you can change, or you can add an extension you want to run PHP on, for example, those kind of things. Is path traversal possible, that you actually upload it into another folder, not the one where it's supposed to go into, right? Try cross-site scripting RCE payloads on upload. Look for GraphQL uploads, right? And then images, upload an image, download the image, check the EXIF information. If EXIF information is still present, then it's a bug in most cases because it's PII effectively. Content length is the application checking how long that upload is, or can I upload like a gigabyte or 10 gigabyte or whatever, right? Like, and is it checking the upload frequency? Can I upload 24/7, or can I use only upload X amount in X amount of time? Is there anti-malware and antivirus in place and things like that? JAW tokens, another huge topic, right? Like loads of different attack vectors as per the Portswigger Labs. So like the signature is not checked. The algorithm can be set to no algorithm, to none. And then the signature can be deleted. The signing key might be brute forceable. There's the JW key, the JSON web key, header injection, where you basically give it, you embed your own key, which is obviously yours, and then you tell it, hey, you verify with my key, which is completely against any security practice. JKU header injection, KIT header path traversal, loads of different attacks possible. Where you see them, usually they're almost exclusively used as authentication tokens. So you will see them as the cookie normally, right? And then if you have the chart editor extension installed, you basically see them highlighted in a different color when you go through your burp history, which is really nice. Essential skills. So this is also from the Portswigger Web Academy. This is very important for the exam, right? All three links I put in there is basically scan specific requests is very important. So you see, I don't know, an XML upload or something like this, or an XML call, and you're only interested in that, then you can just scan this specific request, because the problem is in the real exam, if you launch a full scan, it will not be done in 4 hours, basically, right? Like, so you need to be specific. And I mean, this is the purpose of the exam as well, that you know your tradecraft, and you know, I have like a potential SQL injection here or something. Now I want to scan more into this. Or I have like a potential vulnerability here on like host header, or something, and then I just want to scan into this. So read through all these three. This is very important. And I mentioned earlier already, encodings, right? Very, very important. Prototype pollution, usually done with the DOM invader, right? Like, I mean, go through the labs and understand the payloads and stuff like that. But DOM invader is like your big friend here, which is built into the Burp Chromium browser, which you can launch from Burp Suite. GraphQL, most likely not part of the exam yet, but you should be aware of it. So there's multiple vulnerabilities for GraphQL, like denial of service, information disclosure, auth N, auth C, injection attacks, request forgery, hijacking, all kinds of things. Race conditions, to the best of my knowledge, also not part of the exam yet, but that doesn't mean that it could not be, right? Like, I mean, it could always come in. When you see gift cards, when you see logins, when you see forget password functionality, there might be a chance for race conditions, right? So go through the labs, go through the race condition labs, and also install a Burp extension called Turbo Intruder, because it has built-in scripts specifically for race conditions, which makes your life a lot easier. No SQL injection, same like SQL injection, basically. So same places as in our first chapter, same methods. And to automate this, you can use a tool called NoSQL Map, right, which is very similar to SQL Map. And you can also go to payload all the things and to sec lists to get a payload list specifically for NoSQL injections. RESTful APIs, look for the different versions, you know, and like version 1, version 2, version 3, and API documentation if there's any available. Walk the app, click around. You don't need to brute force in the exam, right? Like, the exam is relatively small, in that respect. So you don't really need to brute force anything. And everything is quite visible for you to solve, right? And then the vulnerabilities are pretty much always top 10. There is even a category called API always top 10, which I highly recommend checking out as well, for RESTful APIs and GraphQL APIs. And then last but not least, web LLMs. So this is a complete new topic. What happened here is Portswigger added that recently as a new lab section. I'm not sure if this is already in the exam, might be, but you should familiarize yourself with the most common large language model attacks against AI. So prompt injection, indirect prompt injection, tricking the AI bot or the LLM to talk to backend APIs on your behalf, like APIs you wouldn't normally get to, right? But the LLM has access to them. Chaining vulnerabilities together is super important when it comes to LLM hacking. And then remember, like there's output handling from the LLM, what the LLM gives out, input handling, what it takes in, and the processing rules, how it's being trained, basically. And leaking information is one of the key vulnerabilities around LLMs. Okay, I hope this is helpful. Just to see like quick bullet point lists per vulnerability class, like what to look for and things like that. And I use those, so I'm sharing those with you. Like when I'm doing bug bounty hunting and penetration testing and stuff, I use those myself. It's like my little cheat sheet. And just, whenever you come across a certain technology, hey, what do I need to take into account, basically? Okay, that's all for this section, and I see you in the next one.